The illusion of control has finally cracked. For months, the Kremlin has tried to convince the world that Moscow's skies are untouchable, that Russian technology stands as an impenetrable shield over its capital. But now, that illusion is burning away, one drone strike at a time. What began as a desperate lie has spiraled into one of the most humiliating moments of Vladimir Putin's rule. Yesterday, the Russian president unveiled what he claimed was an unstoppable cruise missile, a nuclear-powered weapon meant to terrify Washington into lifting sanctions. His timing was deliberate, his tone defiant. But within hours, Ukraine answered in the only language that seems to matter anymore: action. A daring Ukrainian drone strike near Moscow forced the Kremlin to scramble. Suddenly, every air defense system Russia had was redirected to protect the capital. The rest of the country was left exposed. The spectacle that was meant to project dominance instead revealed weakness. Russia's much-touted, unbreakable sky fractured in plain view. Putin claimed the missile, codenamed Buvesnik, flew for 15 hours straight, circling over Russia before safely landing. It was, he said, proof that Russia had achieved something no one else could. But there's a problem. A nuclear-powered missile doesn't go unnoticed. Its exhaust would release radioactive particles easily detectable by US and European sensors. And guess what? There were none. Even more telling, the previous two tests of the same missile lasted just seconds, 7 and 15, respectively, before both failed catastrophically. Neither launch achieved flight. Yet suddenly, in the middle of a sanctions crisis, this same missile supposedly performed flawlessly for 15 hours. It doesn't take a defense analyst to see the pattern. The announcement wasn't about science. It was about fear. The goal was to send a message across the Atlantic. Russia still matters. Russia still terrifies. But actions and timing told another story. While Putin boasted of his unstoppable missile, his right-hand man, Kirill Dmitriev, was already in the United States, quietly lobbying American officials. He carried news of the missile test straight to Washington, hoping to convince the White House to ease sanctions. That's not how superpowers behave. You don't parade your most secret weapon, then beg your adversary to believe it works. You don't flex your muscles and then whisper for mercy. Yet that's exactly what Russia did. The fear wasn't confined to words. Within hours of Ukraine's counterstrike, panic spread through the Russian military command. Satellite images showed air defense units being repositioned en masse toward Moscow. The shift was so drastic that entire regions were left unprotected. Oil refineries across the country, already frequent targets of Ukrainian drones, now stood naked under the night sky. And the results were immediate. Another fuel depot, this one near the capital, went up in flames. Videos shared on Russian Telegram channels showed massive plumes of smoke stretching into clouds. Official statements followed the usual script. All drones were shot down. The damage came from debris. But the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. If debris alone can destroy 40% of a refinery, what happens when a drone hits directly? Inside Russia, fear is rising faster than the smoke. For months, analysts have observed Russia's increasing focus on defending one city, Moscow. New air defense batteries surround the capital in concentric rings, like armor around a single beating heart. Maps of these deployments reveal the truth. Putin is protecting himself, not his people. 18 million Russians live in Moscow, but more than 130 million live outside it, in cities, towns, and villages now stripped of protection. The message from the Kremlin couldn't be clearer. The rest of Russia can burn, as long as Moscow survives. And yet, even Moscow is no longer safe. Recent footage from the city shows police officers and conscripts stationed near the Kremlin walls, machine guns mounted on trucks, scanning the sky for incoming drones. It's the 21st century version of medieval guards on castle walls, except this castle is supposed to have the world's most advanced anti-aircraft systems. Why are machine guns necessary if the defenses work? Because they don't. Even Russian soldiers seem to know it. One of Moscow's own air defense missiles reportedly malfunctioned, striking a nearby apartment building instead of a drone. When your own weapons turn against you, fear becomes more than psychological. It becomes logistical. Perhaps the most damning sign of panic came from the Russian Air Force itself. As Ukrainian drones approached Moscow, Russia's top jets, Su-34s, Su-35s, MiG-29s, even Tu-95 bombers, vanished from their bases. Airports closed, hangars emptied, and what should have been a moment to defend the capital became a full-scale evacuation. This wasn't strategy. It was survival instinct. The memory of Operation Spiderweb, when Russia lost an estimated $7 billion worth of aircraft in a single morning, still haunts the military. So instead of defending Moscow, the Air Force fled Moscow. And that raises a question too large to ignore. What kind of superpower abandons its own skies? This entire episode underlines a growing paradox at the heart of Putin's rule. He launched this war claiming it was to protect Russians, but the result has made Russians less safe than ever. Drones now buzz over Moscow. Explosions echo across Belgrade, Bryansk, Kursk, all cities that once felt far from front lines. Even Russian state media can't fully hide the unease. Every night brings another unexplained fire at another industrial site. Every morning, another promise that everything is under control. But control has become the one thing Putin no longer possesses. When he was confronted with his contradiction at a press conference last December, he fell back on old talking points: NATO expansion, Western betrayal, BRIC solidarity. He spoke of fairness and sovereignty, of a Russia that must never be reduced to a supplier of raw materials. He insisted that his invasion was an act of defense, that without it, Russia would have lost its sovereignty. But sovereignty isn't something you prove by hiding under air defenses. And security isn't something you build by surrounding yourself while your people stand exposed. So here's a question for you, and for every viewer watching right now on Global Briefing. If a nation cannot protect its own capital without fleeing its skies, if its leaders hide behind walls while telling the world they are unafraid, then is that nation still a superpower or just a shadow pretending to rule? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, because the answer to that question will define the next decade of global security. Let's return to the so-called unstoppable missile. Western analysts now believe the Buvesnik announcement was pure theater, a psychological operation designed to distract from Russia's mounting internal crisis. The economy is shrinking under sanctions. The ruble has plunged. Oil exports are faltering as refineries burn. Skilled engineers are fleeing. And inside Russia, the mood is shifting from patriotic pride to quiet despair. Even loyal propagandists are struggling to fill airtime without acknowledging the obvious. Russia, once feared for its might, is now defined by its fear. This is what military exhaustion looks like, not dramatic collapse, but slow erosion. Every drone that pierces Russian airspace chips away at the myth of invulnerability. Every evacuation order exposes another crack in the armor. When your army fears flying over your own capital, when your people sleep under the echo of your own misfired missiles, that's not strength. That's the anatomy of decline. From Washington to Warsaw, defense analysts are drawing lessons. First, Russia's vaunted air defense systems are not foolproof. Their radar networks can be overloaded by swarms of cheap drones. Their missiles are expensive and limited. Their operators are poorly trained and overworked. Second, information warfare still matters, but truth always wins in the long run. The Kremlin can claim victory, deny losses, invent unstoppable weapons, but in the age of satellite imagery and real-time intelligence, lies don't last long. Third, the psychological shift inside Russia could prove more dangerous than any physical damage. Fear erodes discipline. Distrust corrodes leadership. If the Russian Air Force won't defend Moscow, how can the Kremlin expect soldiers in occupied territories to keep fighting? And when the illusion of power fades, deterrence fades with it. For Ukraine, these strikes are more than tactical victories. They are symbolic. Each drone that reaches Russian soil sends a message: you are not untouchable anymore. For the United States and its allies, this unfolding chaos reaffirms that sanctions and support are working. The Russian war machine, stretched thin, is losing its ability to intimidate. For China and other BRICS members, it's a warning. Partnership with Moscow carries reputational risk. The more the Kremlin doubles down on paranoia, the less credible its global posture becomes. And for ordinary Russians, it's a tragedy, a reminder that the man who promised security has delivered only fear. The next months will likely bring more strikes, more evacuations, and more denials. Ukraine has learned how to weaponize agility, cheap drones, smart coordination, and relentless timing. Russia, meanwhile, is spending billions trying to defend a single city while its infrastructure crumbles elsewhere. It's a losing equation. Even if Moscow survives every drone attack, the psychological damage is irreversible. Every time a siren sounds, the myth of Russian strength dies a little more. The Kremlin's obsession with control over media, borders, narratives has left it blind to the simplest truth. Real control requires competence, not fear. History may remember this as a moment when the Russian Empire, in its modern form, began to unravel, not through revolution or invasion, but through the collapse of its own illusions. Putin's empire wasn't built on economic power or technological superiority. It was built on belief The belief that Russia could not be challenged. That belief is gone. Every failed interception, every burning refinery, every empty airbase tells the world that the myth is over. And once a myth dies, it can never be resurrected. For years, Putin has told his people that the West is weak, that NATO is divided, that Russia is destined to rise again. But the images now emerging from Moscow tell a different story, a story of soldiers aiming machine guns at the sky, of residents watching explosions on the horizon, of a president hiding behind layers of concrete and radar screens. The war that was meant to project power has instead exposed vulnerability. The skies over Moscow, once symbols of pride, are now symbols of fear. And that's how empires fall. Not with a single decisive battle, but with a slow realization that their strength was never real to begin with. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to subscribe to Global Briefing. We bring you the stories behind the headlines, where power, politics, and truth collide. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next report.